This is such a wonder of natural science. Magnificent creation. This can of pop Coke soda. Unopened, I can stand on it and not crush it. Yet, when I open it, I can. This is magnificent. How does this work? That's simple. You just marvelous. Simply marvelous. It's a shame no one understands this. No, look. This must be a fabrication then. A sham. A conspiracy.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Morning, everyone. The pressure-fed astronaut here to take on space hoaxers, moon landing deniers, to talk about aerospace engineering while doing so. We're back to conspiracies, finally. Yay! Today's video is debunking Orphan Red's video on why the ISS is fake because of thermodynamics and material science. Now, I'm going to warn you here, I'm just a structures engineer. My field really isn't in the thermal or material side of things because I'm normal. But her analysis is so simplistic that I can take it on.
ISS is made of different materials. Kevlar, gold, glass of some kinds, I think polycarbonates, glass, metals, other things, Kevlar-like materials. We will look it up and maybe I'll make a little list to go up and down here.
As you can see, she's done rigorous work. I bet. What? I want to be relaxed just like she is. Just start.
S glides around. In the direct light from the sun, you'd have radiant energy from the sun hitting the ISS. There is no atmosphere at that height to buffer the ISS. So there's nothing for the ISS to transfer the heat into.
It's still in the atmosphere. Very thin, of course, but it's still in the atmosphere. The radiators on the ISS are used to cool it. These things here. Wait, do you not know basic heat transfer? Okay, kids, welcome back to 4th grade. There are 3 basic types of heat transfer: conduction, convection, and radiation. Conduction is when you touch a hot thing and it makes you hot. Convection is when the hot thing's in a fluid and the fluid takes the heat to you and you get hot. Kind of like how a lava lamp works. And radiation is when the hot thing's far away, like the sun, and it still burns you. The other aspect of thermodynamics to remember is heat transfer, right? These methods can transfer heat to you, but there's other things to take into account. For example, you have heat inside you because you're above absolute zero. You're not that cool, kids, right? You have to also remember that the external universe is not at absolute zero, so it has heat and it's trying to move heat around. Now, heat transfer is dependent on a lot of things. How much heat is around you, the medium around you of heat transfer, how much heat you can take in at a certain rate, how much heat you can store, and how much heat you can dump off. Heat. There's a lot of it. As there is very little atmosphere for the ISS to dump its heat into through convection and conduction, it uses radiation. Orphan Red says this is a problem.
Sunlight. And when they're not in sunlight, things are very, very cold in space.
Sure.
Because again, here on Earth, we have an atmosphere around us. And so when the sunlight warms the air, it takes a long time for that air to then cool down again. So overnight, we see...
Yeah, there are temperature extremes. If you're a spacecraft engineer, you know how to work around this. She rambles on with a somewhat simplistic but sort of right explanation for why it gets cold at night. We don't care.
Over movement, energy, heat. The ISS is a completely different story. So why is this relevant? Because different materials have different melting temperatures and different freezing temperatures. As we know, metal expands very easily, very quickly at...
Some do, some don't. You didn't specify which ones. Railroad steel, also known as 1084 steel, has a coefficient of thermal expansion of 12 micrometers per meter degrees Celsius, whereas aluminum 2018 T64 is 24.4. Also, you're not specifying a bunch of real factors like, heat transfer, heat flux, or other, dumb nerd things. As you can see from these horrible, icky equations, a sampling of them, of course, that this is a lot harder than materials are different.
Wine bottle open, you put it under hot water, and the lid expands because it's made of metal, and then you can just easily open it up. And we use that in our day-to-day lives, so...
Good example. And yes, the ISS expands and contracts. You'll probably hear it pop and groan a little as this happens. But this isn't some grand discovery of yours, Orphan Red. Engineers know what they're doing. They're not complete idiots.
The different components of the ISS would expand at different rates. This is relevant when we think about, for example, the...
And engineers know about this already. They can take that sort of thing into account. I learned about this in college.
So what would happen if the ISS truly was in space, in low Earth orbit? The metal around the solar panels, when it's in the daytime side of Earth, well, that metal would expand. And the solar panels themselves, because they're made of different materials, they would not expand as quickly, and they would not expand as much necessarily. And so if the outer casing expands and the inner panels don't, they would fall out.
They don't. The picture you just provided disproves what you just said. There's no metal casing. The solar panels are more blanket-like, as NASA describes them, with metal bits at the the very ends, and then of course you have the hinges, kind of like a curtain. But that's it. I scoured the NASA technical report server to find these materials and some structural analysis involving thermodynamics for these for the modules. The problem is NTRS, as nifty as it is, makes it really hard to find things you're looking for, especially now. The closest thing I got was an FEA model of the Destiny module, which was pretty neat, but not what I'm looking for. You could probably find the structural substantiations if you go looking for them.
And you go around to the dark side, because there isn't an atmosphere to make the temperature change more gradual, what would happen is the ISS would go from very 170 degrees Celsius to nearly minus 170 degrees Celsius. Cold, brittle cold. A lot of these metals get brittle when they get cold.
It'll still retain heat though, and glass transition temperature is a thing. So is thermal engineering.
Brittle. I just had a lot of wine.
Of course you did.
Steel actually gets brittle when it gets cold. And so if you had any steel screws or components in any part of the ISS, then it would get really cold, slightly brittle, as it goes around the night side of the Earth.
What kind? What grade? What cold? I don't know if you know this, but steel is a very broad term to describe iron-carbon compounds with up to 2% carbon content. You can sprinkle in some other materials in there, nickel, molybdenum, vanadium. It's called metallurgy. These alloys have different properties. Look up the differences between railroad steel and submarine steels. It's really fascinating stuff. Also, the majority of ISS modules are made of 2219 T6 aluminum.
Actually play a crucial role in failure. When a metal is stretched or loaded, these voids start to grow and link together until the metal fails. And I did this in college. So what? Fatigue's pretty neat. It's really interesting to read about. I highly suggest you research the de Havilland comet crashes, that one Aloha Airlines flight, United 232, and a
bunch of other plane crashes and disasters with fatigue involved. Engineers know about fatigue, thermal loading, and cycling.
It wouldn't have the ability to gradually warm up.
I'd like you to tell me how you know this.
Same way that if you take a Pyrex dish out of the oven and you put it in your sink full of cold water, it's an explosion of Pyrex. It actually happened to me the other day.
You'll notice how she forgets to include the fact that the Pyrex failure is caused by heat transfer from a much more dense medium than space. Space isn't that dense, so heat transfer takes a long time.
And that component would not expound. And it doesn't, valves would give, pieces would come unattached.
Oh, I forgot to mention, the ISS modules have pipes running through them, kind of like your refrigerator, filled with a fluid, ammonia, which takes in the heat, pipes it over to the radiators, which dump the heat through radiation.
It's just not, it doesn't make sense when you actually just sit down and think about the logistics of this machine in space. It just doesn't, it's just not logical.
Sure.
Having said that, I find it interesting that NASA does put all this information about the ISS on the website. And I was looking at the path.
Oh God, no.
One of the reasons that the ISS has this Kevlar-like shielding on it, it was tested by high-speed bullets to make sure that it would be safe against meteorite impact.
Safety is dumb.
Bullets travel very, very slowly compared to meteorites. And
Actually, they use light gas guns. Light gas guns use hydrogen, a light gas, to shoot projectiles at high velocities at simulated targets. The reason we use light gas guns instead of conventional guns is that the exit velocity capable of gunpowder is around like 3.5 kilometers a second, versus a light gas gun could get up to 7 to 11 kilometers a second, which means you can get closer to the simulated velocities.
But for science-minded people who are reading the website and taking in this information, how do you not reject this as...
I can read. Is she a troll? Do we care?
Hitting the windows of the ISS, and I'll just insert that somewhere here.
I can barely read that. Oh, and by the way, you wouldn't use pressure for something like this. You'd use kinetic energy. Pressure is more along the lines of what you do long term when you try to squeeze or pull something, versus kinetic energy, which is something hitting it right away. A micrometeorite isn't going to spend time pressing on the window till it breaks, it's going to hit it.
Every single day, you have these meteorites hitting it with this much power, this much pressure per square inch.
That's not a real unit. What? I don't care.
I have helped you to think about the idea, the concept that maybe the ISS isn't really flying around above your head in space. However, to suggest that the Earth is actually 195 miles bigger than it is. I think that's interesting. How did I come to this? I'm going to look down to see my calculations. And when you take into account the height at which we're told the ISS is flying, 240 miles above the Earth, there's a discrepancy of 195 miles. So,
I don't care. Rounding is fun. The original vision for this channel was to be a debunk channel, in the style of Simon Dan, Fight the Flat Earth Logic, and a whole bunch of others. Though with the flair towards aerospace engineering side of things, since, well, I'm an aerospace engineer. If you want a really bad example of this, watch my Jeranism videos. They're bad. Except conspiracy theorists are boring. Orphan Red's claims could be debunked in 10 minutes on the internet and basic reading comprehension skills. My degree is only really useful for trivial things. These people don't understand geometry. Of what use is multivariable calculus? My expertise can only really apply to very specific conspiracy theories or details. In the year or so since I've started this channel, I've found a much more interesting topic to talk about, as you can probably guess. Conspiracy theorists are easy to mock and deride for their bad logic because they are very obviously wrong. But we'll have people regurgitate Elon Musk talking about Mars colonization within 10 years without batting an eye. Zhishuan and Sebastian fall into the same logic traps as conspiracy theorists to a certain degree, but you don't see endless videos mocking and deriding them for how obviously wrong they are. Or debunking anti-space sentiments, to be fair and balanced. That's a topic I want to talk about too, because there's bad logic there. An upcoming video is called No, Billionaires Aren't Going to Mars, to discuss some of these ideas. This I find to be much more interesting and engaging. I do intend to do some conspiracy theorist debunks, though only those that really need my flair to them. And if you do find any, feel free to send them to me. I'm always looking for suggestions. What did we learn today? Nothing! Oh, we learned something today. We learned that the ISS is fake because this person doesn't understand material science. Isn't it funny how the people who are always discovering that, spaceflight and space travel are fake are those who have no idea what they're talking about, instead of someone like myself who has, engineering knowledge of, physics and the materials at hand? Which leads me to my razor thingy. If these things are fake, the moon landings, space travel, any of that sort of thing is fake, who's more likely going to find it? Flat Earth Steve, who had an epiphany while doing his plumbing job? Or is it going to be someone like me who reads about combustion online for fun? If these are a forgery, they are done so well that the layman cannot find it, because the layman does not understand. Instead, it'd be someone like myself, or other engineers or people with doctorates or things like that, who'd find it instead of the conspiracy theorists, because they will know where a discrepancy is. They'll know the details. They know the inner workings of all this. They'll find the discrepancy first because they'll know what they're looking for. Or at least, within reason. So that's my razor. An inability to comprehend middle school science and, basic physics does not make you right. Stop laughing. It's getting really annoying. Not much else to say. This is a relatively short one. Conspiracy theorists are boring. But if there is one conspiracy theory or theorist that is compelling or interesting that my knowledge would be useful for, feel free to send it to me. Last time I asked you what this was. It's an aerobee sounding rocket. Pressure-fed nitric acid aniline goodness. Except for the booster part, of course. So, who's this? Bye.